everybody, today I am finally getting my hands on what must be one of the most tempting second-hand bargains to ever haunt the British car classifieds, the Aston Martin Rapide. Thanks to our good friend Depreciation, this formerly £165,000, 190 mile an hour, 6-litre V12 leather-lined super saloon with one of the best and most desirable badges in the world can be yours for the price of a second-hand Golf GTI. And I know you're already tempted because I'm already tempted. But before today, I've never had the chance to get my hands on a Rapide to see whether it might be a car good enough that I'd actually want to buy one. So, should I? Should you? Is it worth it? Let's find out. Trying to piece together a timeline for the evolution of the Rapide has been somewhat difficult, owing to the fact that all of the many sources I've used have got almost exclusively conflicting dates for when the car received its various upgrades. In any case, the Rapide landed way back in 2010, as Aston Martin's first serious attempt at a four-seater, four-door car since the Lagonda of the, well, 1970s, 80s and sort of 90s. You could, I suppose, say that the old Aston Martin V8 was also a proper four-seater, being more generous in terms of rear capacity than any of their later output, the DB7, DB9, Vanquish, DBS and the like. But even from its very inception, the concept behind the Rapide was one that split opinion, and continues to do so today. It is, in essence, a stretched DB9, and to some, that's absolutely brilliant. It is therefore the perfect car, and to others, it's just about the daftest idea you could have ever possibly had. I'll admit that for a very long time I've been in the latter camp, though it's not exactly an ugly thing. By making it essentially a foot, 250mm to be precise, longer than a DB9, it has lost a little bit of the elegance of that car's looks. Now granted, the early DB9 itself has begun to age a little bit, but you only need look at the DBS to see how inherently right the shape is, and the shorter V8 Vantage was, I think, one of the best looking cars of, well, ever. This, though, to give it credit, is still far from ugly, certainly compared to the Porsche Panamera, and I've no doubt there are many watching this who remember with a great fondness the Top Gear four-door supercars episode where they compared a Rapide with the Panamera and the Maserati Quattroporte Sport GTS. I actually owned an example of a Quattroporte GTS. I have latterly driven a Panamera Turbo, and today, finally, I'm getting to complete the trilogy. Though I'm sure there will always be plenty of people who will compare this car with the likes of an Audi RS6, maybe even an S8, a Mercedes S65, E63, BMW 5.7s and everything else. The fact is, this was never a car designed to directly compete with the likes of those. It is really its own thing, and I think the choice of the Panamera and the Maserati as competition was pretty fair. Even in such rarefied company, the Aston Martin has, I think, the most desirable badge and the sexiest engine, if on paper and nothing else. In early guise, it put out 470 horsepower, 443 pound-foot, that's 600 newton-meters, and had a top speed of 188 mile an hour. So hardly shy or underwhelming, particularly compared with the German rivals, who were generally pegged at 155, Panamera notwithstanding. But counting against the Rapide was the fact that in order to preserve this beautiful side profile, the rear space has been somewhat compromised. And that really, to many, was a bit of a daft choice, because the whole point of this car was the rear seats, and in many ways they're the worst bit of it. Not only is space in the back limited, particularly in terms of leg room, if you're over 6 foot you may struggle, it's actually the door which is the biggest issue. It doesn't open all that wide. In Aston Martin tradition, it sort of butterflies up at that 15-degree angle, and it's not particularly big, nor is the line of the car very tall, or the bottom of it very low. So it feels like you kind of feed yourself in through a porthole. Very, very inelegant. I can't imagine many people who'd have ever paid to be in the back of one of these. Compared with just about any luxury car, from a Mercedes S-Class to a Lexus LS, the rear really is a bit of a joke. The shapes are lovely, the quality of leather is impeccable, and the boot is an okay size. In the very early days, Aston Martin tried to market this as a proper four-seater, four-door family car, but allegedly dealers found many customers somewhat unimpressed with that description, so they changed tactic and instead started calling it a proper four-seater sports car. And when they did that, the car started to make a lot of sense. And it may have also helped, based on the feedback of their dealers, who, remember, at this point in time were still reeling from the effects of the global financial crisis, that Aston Martin dramatically reduced the price, though I don't think they ever did so publicly. Allegedly, discounts of some £30,000 were to be had, and I've heard similar stories relating to the DBS. And just to show how much Aston Martin have misread the market for this car, they didn't actually even build the very first ones themselves. Instead, they gave the contract to Magna Steyr over in Graz, Austria, a very well-known company who over the years have built many cars quite successfully. They anticipated they were going to sell some 2,000 of these a year, and though I didn't find exact numbers, apparently they struggled to make a quarter of that. So, in 2011, Magna Steyr stopped building them and production was brought back over to JAYEMM. Then, somewhere in 2012, 2013, this is where my sources start to argue with one another, the car morphed from the Rapide into the Rapide S. That brought with it the usual cosmetic changes, mostly a bigger grille at the front, different wheel options, etc, etc. But more importantly, a boost in power for the engine, from 470 horses up to 550. This dropped the 0 to 62 time from 5.2 seconds down to 4.9 and brought the top speed from 188 up to a nice round 190 mile an hour. The adaptive suspension was also revised, given a new setting for track joining normal and sport, and various other changes were made throughout the car. Overall, it is perceived to be a vastly better product. Then, in around 2014-15, the car got an 8-speed version of the ZF Automatic to replace the 6. That raised the top speed to a nice, healthy 203 mile an hour, dropped the 0 to 62 by about half a second, and even improved the fuel economy. Around the same time, the car also got a new Bosch ECU, raising power by just a few horses and torque by about the same amount. Here, the car produces 457 pound-foot. That's 620 Newton-meters, and in the later cars, it was 630, so about, 460-something pound-foot. At this time, the car also received some minor changes to the suspension, the chassis, and the braking system. Then, in 2018, the last major change for the Rapide was introduced with the AMR model, sporting a 600 horsepower version of this engine and an even sportier setup for the chassis. The car I'm driving today is an early example of the Rapide S, a 2013 in this glorious shade called Volcano Red. As this bit of the road does appear to be quite a bit drier than the other, and I'm sure you're wondering about my continuity today, I'm now going to put it over into manual mode, engage sport for the engine and gearbox, but not the chassis, open up the valves for the exhaust, and see just whether this car is really as good to drive as anything with an Aston Martin badge on it should be. To say, it's really not the car that I was expecting. Because I have genuinely thought about buying one of these over the years, I've actually broken one of my golden rules and read quite a few reviews of them. And said reviews would tell you that the steering, the handling and everything is really good, but the suspension is a little bit too firm, and in the early cars they just don't have that much power. But though I wouldn't ever really call this thing slow, at no point does it really feel like a 190 mile an hour sub 5 second to 60 car. It's brisk, not fast. Maybe I'm being a little bit too harsh on it. In any case, it does make a great noise, and that, of course, is just as important as speed when it comes to an Aston Martin. However, perhaps the biggest disappointment for me is the steering. In fairness, I am on some freshly installed summer tyres, Pirelli P0s, which aren't anybody's favourites, and it has rained quite a bit today, so grip is simply not going to be as good as it could. However, it just doesn't have that texture, that feel of a DB9 and certainly a V8 Vantage and the like. This is not to say that it's bad. The speed of the steering is very nice. It's quite calm, certainly compared to anything Italian of the period, and you can make very, very good progress. The suspension also is a surprise, but actually a pleasant one. Though at lower speeds and over certain imperfections in the road, you can feel that it is a little bit on the firm side. I don't think it's actually that bad. In fact, when the tarmac does smooth out a little, and this section is particularly bad, it's a little bit soft and wallowy. Not in a bad way, but in a way that I just wasn't expecting based on what I'd read. It rides like, I think, a nice big quick saloon car should. Now, it does have different modes, and in the interest of science, I'm going to try one of those. So I've put the adaptive dampers into sport, and I'm going to do the same for the engine. In reality, this doesn't really change all that much, but, you know, let's see. Just to put some perhaps more useful context on the speed of this thing, I'm in third gear, 40 miles an hour, everything's in sport, I'm in manual, I'm going to put my foot down, there's 45, there's 50, and there's 60. So like I said, not slow, but if you compare it to just about anything modern and turbocharged, not especially quick either. Drive goes, in case you were wondering, exclusively to the rear wheel, so I am taking it a little bit easy in some of the sections here that I know are a touch greasy, but honestly, grip feels absolutely fine. Truthfully, the dampers being in sport, I just had to check because it doesn't actually feel massively different. You hold the button and it'll go into track, and yes, you can feel track. Instantly, that has changed quite a bit. On better sections of road, I could actually probably see you using the track dampers, but on the worst ones, you don't want to. In terms of the driving position, the view out and all that sort of stuff, it is almost exactly DB9. It's eerily so. You can actually get yourself sat nice and low in this. I've got plenty of room for just about everything. Slightly disappointed that the steering column adjustment is still manual. Given the amount of gadgets and gizmos and things in a car like this and the price that Aston Martin were charging, I would have thought that that would have been electric, but hey-ho. Certainly as something to sit in, I think it feels far more special, more exciting and more interesting than either the Quattroporte or the Panamera. So though I wouldn't say that I was in love with it, there is one thing you do need to know about this car, which is that today you could pick up an example of an early 6-speed Rapide S for just over £40,000. Or to put it another way, the same price as the new Golf GTI that I reviewed a couple of years ago. This is a lot of car for the money. If that's still a little bit too much for you, there are a few examples of the early Rapide out there at less than £30,000. Of course, it is easy to spend quite a bit more, and if you want the AMR, that is still going to be fairly strong money. But honestly, I'm not convinced that's really going to be more car for someone that wants to buy something like this. To me, it's a GT car. Making it harder, stiffer, faster just isn't the way that it should be done. And you kind of knew this was coming, didn't you? Before you go rushing off towards the classifieds, there are a few things that it's only responsible for me to tell you. When I was doing my research for this car, everything I read said, you know what, the best thing about the Rapide, it's actually really reliable, really decent. That engine is strong, the gearboxes are good, barring a few minor issues with the early 8-speed that was sorted in a recall, they are decent, strong cars. It feels very well made. It's a lovely place to spend some time in. All the infotainment here is essentially the same as a Vantage, DB9, whatever, of the era, so it's decent, not brilliant. This has the pop-up tweeter B&O stereo, which is fantastic, and as a car to cover big miles in, I love it. But I've been trying to review John's Rapide for about 2 years now. In that time, many others have offered me theirs, and I've said, no, don't worry, I've got one that I can go and drive up in Scotland. Well, his first Rapide, you see, he had for 14 months, in which time I visited Scotland about 3 or 4 times. And for none of those was it available, because of the 14 months that he owned the car, he only had it for 4. that was returned. The problems with that car were actually never fully identified, but were always electrical in nature. It seemed almost impossible to cover more than about 150 miles without a check engine light or something else happening. This car has been a far more successful experience. In terms of the mechanical side of things, it has been thus far fault-free. Unfortunately, it did require a replacement of both the front and back glass, and the company who did it didn't do the job quite perfectly, so it does need a bit of rectification work on account of a little bit of water ingress. There is also a few other cosmetic items that need tending to, but other than that, it seems thus far to be a much better car. Others that I've spoken to over the years seem to have a very similar experience. Either they buy the car, have it for years and never have a single issue, or they barely see it, with the problems nearly always being electrical in nature. And once again, that's an area where the Rapide isn't really any different to a DB9, DBS or a Vanquish of the same time. Fuel consumption also deserves a special mention, as if you thought a 2-ton, 6-litre naturally aspirated V12 Aston Martin was going to be frugal, but be warned, in the time John has had this, and he has been enjoying it, the best he's seen is about 20 or 21. Just about all reports I've read say that around town or when having fun, single digits are not exactly unusual, and as an average, if you're expecting anything in the 20s, you're going to have to work for it. The later 8-speed box cars do have a little bit of an advantage here, but it appears to be chiefly on the motorway, where the extra pair of gears allows them to run the engine a little bit slower. Servicing and the like is as you would expect with a V12 Aston Martin of the day, so don't expect much change out of £1,000. I would certainly say that if you are thinking of buying one of these, an Aston Martin dealer is probably the place to get it, or reputable specialist, because even if you do have issues, they will hopefully sort them out. I was thinking I was going to get in this car and come out going either, oh, it's horrible, it's awful, I hate it, or I have to have one. And truth be told, this is one of the rare occasions where it's kind of in the middle. I really like it. It's an absolute pleasure to drive. If I could carry on for another hour or two, I absolutely would. But I've had my fun putting my foot down, and I've no interest or need really to do it anymore. It's done its job, and done its job well, and I respect it greatly. But I also don't lust for it. However, I would forgive anybody who did. So on that basis, I suppose, the Rapide S has done its job. And for under £50,000, I really struggle to think of anything this special that you could get. The next competitor really for me would be a Ferrari FF, and that may be twice the car in some ways, but it is twice the price, will cost twice as much to keep going, and is almost certainly likely to be twice as much hassle. I love those dearly, but you got to be dedicated to have an FF. I'm sure there'll be some that say the same about the Rapide. But there we have it. That is the Aston Martin Rapide S. A huge thanks to John for bringing it out, and as ever, to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.